I think the biggest challenge that leaders face when it comes to solving conflict is that they're afraid to let it happen in the first place. I think when most leaders think about conflict, what they have in mind is what's called relationship conflict, which is the personal, emotional, I hate your guts and I wish I didn't have to work with you kind of strife that people sometimes feel in interaction. But organizational psychologists have discovered that there are other kinds of conflict, and they're not actually problematic. Sometimes they're necessary. One is called task conflict, which is when we disagree about vision and strategy and we debate ideas. The other is process conflict, which is when we disagree about who's going to do what, when. We need to have those debates in order to make the best possible decisions. We need to have that kind of conflict in order to avoid groupthink. And so the big question is, how do you foster constructive task and process conflict without brewing relationship conflict? I'm not sure there are easy answers to that question, but I do think the framing really matters. There's some research by Corinne Bendersky and her colleagues showing that even just asking, can we debate this, makes it more likely that people have a good task or process conflict, as opposed to taking it personally and thinking that the relationship is in jeopardy. And so I think the framing of the conversation really matters. And if we can have more good disagreements and productive arguments, we're going to learn more from each other.
You try to ignore them, or you try to be nice and saying, oh, could we do this way? Could we do that way? Instead of maybe just take the conflict or take the scary discussion up front. And what I have learned is, I know myself, when I have a CEO usually where I think, oh, there's the one topic I have to take a discussion with, the longer I wait with it, the worse it gets. And when you take it, usually the other party has been thinking the same thing and you actually get a real good discussion. So it is take the conflicts and take them with a mature, caring way. It's not about who's right, who's wrong. It's about trying to find a solution that works better for all parties.
If I try to find some general rule, I would say, first of all, try to find out what's going on. Try to listen to both parts of the conflict so that you really understand what it's all about. If it's solvable, if there's an obvious solution, then of course enact that. Try for as long as possible not to take sides, but when it is obvious you have to take sides, do so decisively, perhaps even ruthlessly, and solve the issue with whatever measures are required.
When things go badly, you have two choices in the companies, or actually three. You can cry, you can scream, or you can just say, make completely fool out of situation, and thus let the negative energy go out and move forward. We're so focused whose fault something was, that we spend the energy on the history and fault finding. I mean, just look at the politics at the moment. Whose fault was it? Instead of saying, stop it, we are where we are, let's move forward. And if you have that forward-looking thing and you have this guts to fail, if I had to take the bike, I would be flat on here on the floor. But, eventually you realize when you do stupid things, you realize nobody died, the company is still there, and actually we all laughed and had a good time. So, daring. Finns are very good with sisu. And sisu sometimes gets translated, we're in the bloody moss, and we're in the moss for this deep. We're really good. We're still stamping on the moss for 2 weeks. You maybe better get out of the bloody moss and move forward, versus being a sisu and being able to stamp there forever.
Well, I think this is one of the great responsibilities of leader, is to help address and resolve conflict. And I think there are leaders that foment conflict, and then there's leaders that avoid conflict. Neither of those is going to help create productive solutions and innovations from that conflict. I think the best leaders move toward that. They find the friction and avoid the temptation to fix it fast, but instead say, this conflict is where we need to sort out conflicting ideas, conflicting priorities, conflicting needs. We find that the best leaders that become multipliers to the intelligence and capability of their organizations are debate makers. When it comes to the big decisions, they stop, they pause, and they lead their team in hard-hitting debate?
Leaders most often make mistakes when it comes to conflict resolution by thinking that they can solve it in one go. I believe that it's really important not just to understand the dynamics of the conflict, maybe between two people, two departments, maybe even two ideologies, but really get to the bottom of why that exists. Usually it's because the strategy or the vision of the company is not clear enough to make decisions easy to see. I think that if there's a conflict within the company, if there are clear directives about what the company's mission is or what they're supposed to do, then conflict becomes easier to resolve because there's really only one way to do it, to execute. And so then it becomes a question of how to do it. And if there's conflict there, then of course the leader is the decider.
In order to explain to you what I mean by ruinous empathy, I want to tell you a story about one of the most painful moments in my career. I had just hired this guy, we'll call him Bob, and I liked Bob a lot. He was smart, he was charming, he was funny. Everybody loved working with Bob. One problem with Bob: he was doing terrible work. All I knew was that Bob was handing work into me and there was shame in his eyes. And I would say something to him along the lines of, "Oh, Bob, you're so awesome, you're so smart, we all love working with you, maybe you could make it just a little bit better." Which of course he never did. And this went on for 10 months. And eventually the inevitable happened. And I realized that if I didn't fire Bob, I was gonna lose all my best performers. Because not only had I been unfair to Bob not to tell him and give him a chance to fix the problem, I'd been unfair to the whole team. And everyone was fed up. Their deliverables were late because Bob's deliverables were late. They weren't able to spend as much time on their work because they were having to redo Bob's work. And the people who were best at the job, they were going to quit. And they were gonna go work someplace where they could do the best work of their lives. So I sat down to start a conversation with Bob that I frankly should have started 10 months previously. And when I finished explaining to him where things stood, he sort of pushed his chair back from the table. He looked me right in the eye and he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And as that question was going around in my head with no good answer, he looked at me again and he said, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." And now I realize that by not telling Bob, thinking I was being so nice, I'm having to fire him as a result of it. Not so nice after all. But at this point, even Bob agreed he should go because his reputation on the team was just shot. All I could do in that moment was make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again, and that I would do everything in my power to help other people avoid making that mistake.
I think when there's conflict within an organization, the leader's responsibility is to deal with it quickly, consistently, unemotionally, and yet empathetically. And I say unemotionally because I believe too often when a leader brings too much emotion into the resolution of conflict, it makes the conflict itself more emotional than it needs to be. Oftentimes, these are simple behavioral things that just need to be addressed and simple things that need to become realigned. Leaving emotion out often leads to a more quick resolution. But I say empathetically because we should always give people the benefit of the doubt. Ask the question before saying the thing. I would always rather err on the side of assuming the best in someone and be proven wrong than to assume the worst in someone and be proven wrong. And I say quickly and consistently because we can't let conflict fester. We need to deal with it in the moment, and we need to deal with it every time it arises. Otherwise, people, well, they don't understand what's important to you. If something's important to you, you need to address it every single time.
One of the most important things that a leader can do to solve conflict situations on their team is to prevent backstabbing. Do not let one person on your team come and talk to you about another person on your team who's not in the room. It feels in that moment like you're being an empathetic leader if you listen. This is the one time when listening is not a good idea. If you listen to that one person talking about another person, all you're doing is stirring the political pot. Instead, what you want to do is you want to say, did you talk to that person directly? And if they say no, say, would you please? And then follow up and say, did you all work it out? And if they didn't, you want to get them both in your office at the same time. As a leader, you are not a shuttle diplomat. You're more like a marriage counselor. So don't talk to one person unless the other person is in the room.
Let people express to the other side what they think the other side's opposing point of view is before they express their own. This exercise is played out a number of different times. And if you get people in a room and the one rule is anyone who speaks says, before I disagree, here's what I think your position is based on. Here's how I think you see things. And you're not allowed to express your own opinion until you fully and completely express the other side's position so that you get a that's right out of them. You'll find that 60 to 90% of the conflict will immediately disappear. Now, that doesn't mean it's all going to disappear. It's just going to mean that there's going to be less there for you to deal with, and then the people are going to be more collaborative, working together going forward. So it's making people feel heard before we try to settle the conflicts and making them feel heard by the people that are on the opposite side of the conflict.
So one thing leaders can do to enable people to fight better or disagree more in the room is to ask for dissenting voices, is to ask the quiet one to speak up, is the ability to get a productive dialogue where people feel it's safe to speak up. And if they criticize you as a leader, that is not going to hurt them. That requires some self-confidence in you as a leader to be able to do that. That's kind of the fight part. At the same time, as a team, we need to come together. We need to unite around decisions. So you need to cultivate a set of norms that when a decision is made by you or someone else, that people fall in line, they commit to that decision, even if they disagree with that. So fight and unite is a way to resolve conflict.